You know, have you ever stopped to think about the exact moment a story starts being, well, just a story? I want you to consider a truly terrifying threshold for a second. That invisible line where internet lore, which is born entirely of pixels and hyperactive imaginations, actually crosses over into the physical world and starts dictating real human action. It sounds completely like science fiction, right? But the crazy thing is, it's happening right now, all around us.
To really ground the stakes of what we're talking about in this explainer, we kind of have to look back at a pretty tragic event from May of 2014. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, two 12-year-old girls lured their friend into the woods and stabbed her 19 times. And when they were questioned by the police, their motive wasn't rooted in any sort of traditional reality. They committed this horrific act as a blood sacrifice to please Slender Man, which was a completely fictional, faceless boogeyman created on internet message boards. Okay, so to figure out how something like this actually happens, we need to look at a concept brilliantly explored by director Jane Schoenbrunn in their documentary on the Slender Man phenomenon and later in their film I Saw the TV Glow. It's the idea of a tulpa. Originally, this is a Buddhist mystical concept. A tulpa is an imaginary entity that essentially becomes real or, gains actual real-world agency if enough people validate its existence and power. And this just perfectly frames our entire discussion today. When a collective obsession reaches a fever pitch online, it can absolutely manifest dangerous real-world consequences.
Welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us today. Our objective is absolutely fascinating. We're going to dissect the psychological and digital formulas that transform online fiction into physical reality. Basically, we are going to map out exactly how belief is engineered on the modern internet. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the power of tulpas, move into tales of the anomalous, explore the rhetorical environment, dive into the QAnon LARP, look at gamifying conspiracy, and finally finish up with fictions that hack reality. All right, part 1. The power of tulpas, escaping into danger. Let's dive right into this. The Slender Man, it didn't just magically appear out of nowhere. It functioned as a literal digital tulpa. It originated back in 2009 within the open-source creepypasta community, which was basically a place dedicated to short, scary internet stories. Through crowdsourced myth-making, users were constantly adding to the lore. They were critiquing and refining this monster until it was perfectly terrifying. But the real tragedy occurred because this fiction totally blurred the lines with reality, ultimately preying on vulnerable people. In the Waukesha case, the perpetrators were dealing with severe isolation and undiagnosed mental illnesses like early-onset schizophrenia. The fiction became their coping mechanism, and eventually, it literally became their reality. Moving on to Section 2, Tales of the Anomalous, Stories that Do Not Fit. So what is the actual structural blueprint of these stories? Like, why do some urban legends just stick in our brains like glue? To understand this, we can look to academic Philip Speakman. He calls these anomalous tales. Basically, these are stories about things that simply do not fit into our rational worldview. But rather than just being dismissed, their very absurdity makes them super infectious. They trouble the boundaries of belief itself. And on the internet, these tales act as a vector for social contagion because they rely on an implicit social contract. Think about it. We're using the exact same platforms to read these terrifying stories as we use to read the daily news or, check on our friends. The context just totally collapses. To really see how this context collapse is weaponized, look at communities like Reddit's No Sleep Board. Their explicit golden rule is, everything is true here, even if it's not. Speakman calls this the aesthetic of the authentic paranormal. By formatting fictions as earnest first-hand reportages, complete with blurry photos or fake police reports, they literally trick our brains. The community plays along inside the narrative. It's essentially a collective, consensual hallucination that trains the brain to treat fiction as genuine reality. Section 3. The rhetorical environment. Trapped in the narrative. Now, pop culture loves to tell us that people in cults do extreme things because of some sort of hypnotic, charismatic leader giving a speech. But as academic Catherine Camille argues in her research, this is actually a dangerously oversimplified way to look at it. Instead, it's really about the rhetorical environment. It's this totalizing ecological system of information, constant conditioning, and pure validation. Eventually, that environment becomes so insular and self-reinforcing that committing a violent act or even sacrificing your own life literally feels like the only logical option left on the table. When we impartially contrast physical cults from the past, like Jonestown or Heaven's Gate, with modern decentralized online groups, a pretty chilling reality emerges. Historically, a cult required physical isolation, right? You had to pack up and move to a compound in Guyana or a mansion in San Diego. Today, that geography has shifted entirely to the digital realm. A person can be sitting right there in their family living room, but psychologically, their rhetorical environment is completely walled off by algorithms, obscure message boards, and abandoned corners of the internet. The physical geography changed, for sure, but the psychological entrapment is identical. All right, Section 4, the QAnon LARP. Fictional frameworks, real consequences.
To really understand the origins of QAnon as an objective case study, you absolutely have to understand the concept of LARPing. That stands for live action role-playing. On anonymous image boards like 4chan, LARPing is a super common creative writing exercise. Anonymous users will hop online and pretend to be an FBI agent or a high-level government insider or some big whistleblower. It's the exact same open-source storytelling mechanism that birthed the Slender Man, but instead of horror, it's being applied directly to global politics.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the true origins of the phenomenon. Notice this real reaction from a 4chan user responding to early conspiratorial posts. They're essentially rolling their eyes, going, "Oh God, not another one." They literally called it the dance of the LARPer. It was widely understood within that specific digital subculture to be nothing more than an exercise in fictional roleplay.
So the crucial point here is how this specific LARP evolved. Take a look at the first canonical Q drop from October 2017. Notice the visual chaos, the cryptic abbreviations, that whole pulp spy novel tone. It wasn't written to deliver clear facts. It was engineered specifically to spark engagement. By posing vague questions and leaving little breadcrumbs, it invited the audience to fill in the blanks themselves. It initiated this massive crowdsourced investigation where the readers felt like they were the main characters uncovering a secret world.
Which brings us to Section 5, gamifying conspiracy, following the White Rabbit. Check this out. Notice how this anonymous user is actively working to decode the cryptic Q drops, suggesting they add a legend so a quote-unquote normie can read it. This is literally the gamification of conspiracy in action. It functions exactly like a game design concept. Users are given puzzles, they actively solve them together, they translate clues, and then they build these accessible graphics to recruit non-initiates, the normies, into their alternate world. It's highly participatory, and because of that, it is highly addictive. Let's walk through how this escalates, step by step. It starts as a completely fictional LARP on an obscure board. Next, it becomes a gamified puzzle, building a really dedicated community of decoders. Step 3 is the critical threshold, though. Internet agitators intentionally port this narrative off 4chan and onto mainstream social media like Facebook and YouTube, where those audiences have no idea about the LARPing context. They just take the fiction at face value. And finally, step 4, the rhetorical environment becomes so totalizing that it results in real-world physical action, most notably culminating in the events of the Capitol riot on January 6th. The fiction successfully dictated reality. And finally, Section 6, fictions that hack reality, the ultimate consequence. The late cultural theorist Mark Fisher actually called this phenomenon hyperfiction. He argued that when a story gathers enough momentum, enough hype and collective participation, it undergoes an animistic transformation. There is an actual escape of agency. The fiction itself gains a life of its own. It stops being something we just passively read on a screen, and it jumps right out to actively intervene in and overwrite our physical reality. From Slender Man to global political conspiracies, the map of the fiction is preceding the actual territory of our lives. Which brings us to what I think is absolutely the most vital question we can ask ourselves today. If our digital tulpas, our open-source myths, and our gamified anomalous tales now possess the unchecked power to literally rewrite physical reality, what world are we collectively building next? I want you to think critically about the rhetorical environments you inhabit online and the stories you choose to validate. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.